the pandemic and the events that took place in March of 2020. And what you saw was Main Street shut down. It literally shut down and came to a grinding halt. And Wall Street had an initial panic and a rapid recovery, a V-shaped recovery. And so we put those two together. You had an L-shaped recovery. Main Street just shut down. And then you had a V-shaped recovery, and we call that a K. But if you decompose it, and I was very sensitive to it because on one hand, in my personal life, I'm an investor. And in my public life, I run a Main Street company. I run a software company that has people that manufactures software that does things. So what I saw was if you had a large portfolio of stocks or assets and you went into this pandemic, after the Fed ended up expanding the money supply with the interest rates going to zero and the expansion of the M2 monetary base, the money base, you found that you were actually 25, 30% wealthy or doing nothing. You could have done nothing the entire year. As long as, right, the only mistake you could have made is do something, right? If you had $1 billion and you did nothing for the entire year, you had $1.3 billion at the end of the year. On the other hand, if you had a Main Street company and you're generating, let's say, $100 million a year in cash flow and you're valued at $1 billion because of the cash flow, you would have to be generating $130 million after a year to be valued the same, because the value, the assets that the money buy is being devalued by 30%. If the currency is devalued at some rate, and the money supply expanded to 24% last year, so you could use that as your metric, or you could use the S&P 500's return as another metric. But clearly, the currency devalued, which means that if you're a Main Street company, you had to work 20% harder to get nothing. And if you're a Wall Street company, you had to do nothing to get 20% better. And so what I saw was a shift in balance of power, and a shift in wealth. And it was pretty disturbing to me too. It's like, you don't want to be the dentist working for a fixed amount of money that's getting 20% less valuable every year.
So the average person, I think, struggles with that because they're like, well, I'm getting my stimulus check. What do you mean? Like, how's this going down? Cost of bread's the cost of bread. I'm all good.
I think there are some fundamental misnomers or understandings of the world that people miss. And the most pernicious one is the idea that inflation equals CPI,
which is consumer price index. Average shit.
The idea that there is a number for inflation. Inflation is only 2%, or inflation is 1%, or inflation might be 3%. Okay, that's just a mistaken idea. What is inflation? Inflation is the rate at which the things you want to buy are going up in price. And what are the things you want to buy? Well, you might want to buy pizza, might want to buy Netflix, but you might want to buy a house. You might want to rent a house, but if you want to rent a house, it might not go up in price as much as if you want to buy a house. What if you want to buy a house in the middle of Manhattan? It might go up in price differently than a house in the middle of Kansas. What if I want to buy food? What if I want to buy energy? What if I want to buy a Picasso? Or what if I want to buy something truly scarce? What if I want season tickets to, the baseball game? What if I want health care? What if I want early retirement? They're all things you can buy. You can buy assets. You can buy luxury. You want to buy a Rolex? You want to buy a Maserati or a Porsche? Luxury goods? Or do you want to buy commodity goods? And there are some things you don't have to pay for, right? They're ad finance, right? Streaming YouTube. What's that? What's the inflation rate on streaming YouTube? Ad finance, right? So the inflation is the cost of stuff. If the money supply is expanding, that means the currency is devaluing. In a closed system, if we want to make that simple, I live in a town and there's 1,000 houses, and I double the amount of currency in the town, and everybody wants a house. What's the price of houses do, right? If the only thing I can buy is a house, and if I double the amount of currency, then the price of the house must go up. probably go up by 2, but maybe not exactly by 2, but it goes up. If I increase the amount of money, if I raise everybody's salary by a factor of 10, and I keep the number of houses constant, one might presume that the price of houses will go up. How will inflation actually take place? Well, there's a different coefficient for the price gradient, or the change in price for everything you might want to buy, and it's different at every point in time. So, for example, if I put you in lockdown and I make it illegal to go to the movies, and I make it illegal to go to a restaurant, then the price of restaurants and movie theaters aren't going to go up. If I make it illegal or inappropriate to go on a cruise and fly in an airplane, then the price of cruise tickets and movie theater tickets and restaurants, they just don't go up because you can't buy them if you want to. There's no velocity on that money. Okay, what can you buy? You can buy stocks. You can buy crypto, right? So what does go up? Well, if I give you $1,000 and you can go and you can buy stocks, then the price of stocks go up. Now, what happens next? Well, so everybody gets locked into their apartment and they decide they really want a house with grass. So what happened next? Well, 12 weeks after the lockdowns, the price of like suburban housing went up and people started trying to buy houses. They said, this is unprecedented. We've never had so much demand for houses in the suburbs of New York. Well, that's not a surprise. You know what? If your choice is, if I closed the parks in the cities and I close your office, then why wouldn't you move out into the country and live at a house with green grass, right? You're not the utility. You're not missing out on a restaurant. You're not missing out on a park. You're not missing out on your job. So rational human behavior causes people to take their money and go buy things they want. And where do they buy them? Well, Hampton's real estate went up in price 50%. Palm Beach, they go to the places where they want to go. Did the price of land in the middle of North Dakota go up by 50%? Not so much. It's not a scarce, desirable asset by people stampeding. So what is inflation? Inflation is a vector. It's not a scalar. A vector means you can calculate for 1,000 different products, 1,000 different numbers, and they change every month. So I could give you 1,000 different numbers 12 different times a year, and it would be different in every city. Everybody can figure out that in Minot, North Dakota, it's different than Manhattan. And it's even different in Manhattan than in Brooklyn. And it's different in Brooklyn than in upstate New York. So inflation is varying by time, by space, and it's varying by every item. And if you want to calculate the inflation index, you have to construct a market basket of goods and services and assets that you would want to acquire. And then I can give you the rate at which that market basket of goods and services and assets is changing every month or every week. Of course, that would be different for every person. So what happened after the lockdowns? Well, we got hyperinflation in some things. Bonds hyperinflated. Cost of bonds doubled in 3 weeks.
Whoa.
That's hyperinflation. Equities inflated. They were up 40%, year over year. Cryptos inflated. Bitcoin was up 300-400%. So the cost of scarce art, the cost of luxury real estate, all of that stuff inflated, or hyperinflated. What didn't inflate? Things that people can't buy. And yeah, I could define a market basket of things that don't go up in price by definition too. Right? If I define a market basket of highly manufactured goods that have very low variable cost, right? Like, what's the price of your streaming YouTube video? Or what's the price of some manufactured box of macaroni that's 5% food and 95% marketing? Right? I mean, if I spent $2 billion on a factory to stamp out widgets that have a variable cost of 10%, right? Then I've already sunk the cost in the factory. Those things don't inflate at the same rate as, if there's only one Mona Lisa in the world, and if I increase the amount of money in the world by a factor of 100, don't you think that the value of the Mona Lisa would go up, assuming that lots of wealthy people wanted it? And that gets you to the interesting theory of economics, right? If I want to really understand anything in the engineering world, I need to use vector calculus, right? Or vector math. I would never use arithmetic. You cannot solve the problem of fluid dynamics with arithmetic. You can't design a boat, you can't design a plane, you can't design a nuclear reactor, and you can't design a bridge with arithmetic. Well, a scalar like, oh, inflation is 2%, that's arithmetic, right? Adding it up, right? Isaac Newton gave us the calculus of variations, and calculus in general, and pretty much every sophisticated thing that flies or floats, it's all based upon calculus, and you just can't solve the problem without that math. So that's the problem with inflation.